Okay, part two of the assignment we're working on in class. I mentioned in class on Thursday that there's two things going on here. We wanted to look at animation as part of a system, right? So we're using this motion graphics approach, non-destructive animation tools, which just means that I still have these parameters that I can go back and change. So I think I'll start with changing some of these to illustrate that point. And the second way of animating we want to look at is through simulation. So how can I use tools, I don't know, physics tools, hard and soft body parameters to animate things in such a way that would be prohibitive and difficult to do animating frame by frame. So let's just start with, I have this in the first one I did this bubble. Let's make this a little bit shorter for now. Right, so we had this bubble animation, but what I want to do is change it so that the animation doesn't go down, it actually maybe works its way up. And instead of bubble, what if I just go back and change this to be bounce? Right, so I can immediately change this. You notice that the letter spacing is a little bit off. Now part of that is because I'm using a delay, and the delay sometimes needs to play through so that it gets back to kind of its resting point. The calculations are happening frame by frame by frame. So, all right, so that's working, except for I don't want it to go down. I want the plane effector to go up. All right. All right, so I've made these quick changes, right? And this is absolutely fine. But I did a little example in class. A student was working with a different word. It was the whole idea of how could we make the letters after this part of the animation just fall to the ground, right? How could I make that happen? And there's a range of ways to do this, but basically what we need to do is turn it into a physics object. The letters themselves. So let me go back to the very beginning here, and I'm going to click on the text, and then I'm going to right click, and we've looked just briefly at some of this in class, but there are a bunch of tags. These are like little mini programs that we could put on the objects themselves, and there's some simulation tags. We're going to look at some of that down here later, but there's also this bullet tag. To be honest, these should be kind of connected to the simulation tag, but I suspect Cinema 4D is working on moving from this older bullet physics system to a new one. But for now, what we want to do is, if we go to bullet tag, there are two things that we want to use here. We want to use a rigid body and a collider body. So the rigid body would be things that can fall and gravity affects them and they move things. And then a collider body we'll use here in a minute. That would be like the floor or a wall. Excuse me, something we're not going to animate, but the other physics objects can collide with, right? So first, for the letters, let's just make them a rigid body. All right. So if I go back to the very beginning of the animation, I just press play, you'll see that my letters just fall to the ground. So that's not very good. And what's happening is this is now a physics object, all these letters, and the gravity is now taking over, and they're just not colliding with anything, so they're just falling to the ground. So what I'm going to do is create a plane here, and I'm just going to space this out just to make my point. Okay, so I have this big ground plane. I'm going to move it down just a little bit so that there's a little bit of space. I'm going to hide my work plane. It's kind of bothering me there. And let's hide this world axis. Okay. So there's a little bit of a gap right here. And that's fine because I want it to kind of fall just a little bit. I might move it down even further later. But if I go to the very beginning and, before we do that with the plane, I want it to be a collider body, right? So this is not going to go anywhere. Gravity's not going to affect it, but other objects can collide with it, other physics objects. So you can see the object basically fell nice and smoothly. I'll move this ground a little bit down, just so we can see it a little bit more, right? So you can see it. It's kind of fallen to that space. Okay, so that's okay. And of course, the big problem here is, well, what about my animation? So again, a variety of different ways to treat this, but really what we want to do in this case, this one's kind of simple, is the physics that are going on here. There's lots of different ways that we can turn these on and off when they're going to get triggered. But the simplest way here is we're just going to turn the physics engine on and off. So for now, let's just turn it off. So if I click on the dynamics and I just click this right here, it just means it's not enabled. And what we should see is that our animation still does what it needs to do, right? So that's pretty good, that's fine. But then really what I want to have happen is once it gets done with its little bounce here, and they kind of settle, maybe about here, frame 80, right? I'm going to turn the physics on so that they now apply to this. So if I go to frame 79 and the physics are turned off, I'm going to put a keyframe here. And then I'm going to go to frame 80 and I'm going to turn it on, and then I'm going to keyframe that so that the animation remembers. I'm going to be off for the whole beginning of the animation because I have a keyframe here. And then the very next frame, I'm going to turn it on, and then it will stop obeying the effector part of the animation, and it's just going to listen to the physics itself. So well, let's see what happens here. All right, now why are we doing this way? Well, I think it's just an experiment, right? I don't know if this is the best setup for this. But this isn't bad. I'm going to make the animation a little bit longer so it can play through the physics. All right, so one thing that's happening here is it just kind of they land here. For the physics objects, maybe one thing I could do is just play with some of their attributes here. So for the collisions, maybe it, not that high. I don't know, 50%. The dynamics already set up there. Let's see if I get what kind of difference I get here. Right? So we get a little more bounce out of bounce because I told instead of 5% of a bounce, let's do 65. All right, so that's kind of fun. There's lots of little things that we could play around with this, but the main thing is that we've started with a system where we've used these various motion graphic tools. And we've come back after doing an animation with bubble, changed it to bounce without having to like rebuild anything. We haven't changed anything about it. It still has the same bevels and that. We've just put different letters in there. We've changed it moving up instead of down, and we've applied a physics some physics properties to it, and we've animated that system basically turning on and off. So the only thing that we've really keyframed is the effector moving across the screen and the physics engine turning on and off. Otherwise, all of this animation is happening because of the system. I'm not animating any of the little pieces. I'm just using systems and simulation to create this fun little animation. Okay. I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll work on a different variation of simulation here in another tutorial. All right.